Hello, this is Father Mike Walker of Father Mike's podcast, Father Mike's Bible Study podcast, and the Catholic Combine, the pastor of St. Cecilia Catholic Church in Beaverton, Oregon. If you would like more information about the parish or the podcast, please feel free to email me at frmikewalker@gmail.com. And now, today's podcast. So the son of friends of the family was being confirmed, and he wanted to know if I would be his sponsor. And so I said, well, sure, I could be your sponsor, but, being a sponsor means I have to interview him a little bit. So I said, Andy, what is your favorite Bible passage or your favorite Bible story? And so he didn't hesitate. He just said, the Good Samaritan. And, oh, really? I said, that's great. I said, so why do you like the Good Samaritan? And he said, because we all should act that way. Well, it kind of sums up the whole point, right? You hear these parables, and it's not that hard to get to the meaning of the parable. But it is good to actually maybe back up just a little bit and to look at what led to this parable. So we have a scholar, and he comes up to Jesus, and he asks a very important question. What do I have to do to inherit eternal life? Well, it seems that he kind of knew the answer already. It's almost like those students that go, teacher, I've got a question, and they kind of have an answer in their own mind before they ask the question. I have a feeling this is kind of the case. If he's a scholar of the law, he knows his theory on this. And it's a combination of Deuteronomy chapter 6 and Leviticus chapter 19. Because the combination of both of those talk about loving the Lord your God with your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself. And of course, Jesus asks him, so what do you think? How do you read the law? And so he mentions this. And so Jesus says, good job. Well, he could have left it at that if he wanted to. But being a scholar, he thought he had the next follow-up question. And so he says, so who's my neighbor? And again, he thought he knew the answer to this question as well. But Jesus answers the question not by saying, well, these are your neighbors. But instead, he tells a parable, one that's going to be much more difficult for this scribe to be able to accept. So in this parable, you've got this man. We assume he's a Jewish man, but we don't know for sure, but probably because he's in Jerusalem and traveling down to Jericho. And as he goes, he's met up with robbers, and they beat him and stripped him. Now, because he's been stripped, now you wouldn't quite know who he is on the side of the road. He could be Jewish, but the priest doesn't know if he is or not. The Levite doesn't know if he is or if he isn't, and neither does the Samaritan. But the priest, he's in a bit of a dilemma, because if this person happens to be dead and the priest touches him, then that would make him ritually impure, which means that he could not go back to the temple and offer sacrifice without going through a pretty lengthy purification process. That, and we don't know the reason why he didn't, but we do know that he clearly saw him and went to the other side of the road so he could avoid the whole thing, and then just kept on going. So in his mind, he thought he had some justification that, well, it's not my problem, I don't want to be impure, and who knows what might happen if I go over there. So he heads on in the opposite direction. And then we have a Levite. Now, a Levite, they are their own tribe, but they don't have a place like the other 11 tribes do. The purpose of a Levite is to help the people of Israel in their spiritual walk and with their faith. And so there are a lot of different things they do when it comes to helping families to be able to maintain their faith. And in addition to that, they assist the priests in the temple and other sacrifices. And so the Levite, we don't know if he saw the priest or not, but we do know that he chooses to do the same thing that the priest did. He goes to the other side of the road and he moves on. So now we have the priest, who is supposed to be the representative of the people of Israel and to sacrifice on their behalf and help them to be able to follow their faith, as well as the Levites. they avoid the situation and move on. So the third person we have is the Samaritan. Now, you probably know this already, but Jews and Samaritans did not get along. Actually, Jews had a very strict understanding of this, and they wouldn't even eat with Samaritans. They considered their vessels that they would use for their meals to be ritually impure and unclean. And so they had nothing to do with Samaritans. Yet the Samaritan, for whatever reason, is traveling to Jerusalem, which is a dicey thing to do for a Samaritan. And while he's doing that, he sees someone on the side of the road, doesn't know if he's alive or if he's dead. And he, first of all, feels compassion in his heart, and then he acts on it. And so he goes and he cleans the man up and bandages him, puts him in an inn, and tells the innkeeper that he gives him a couple coins and says, I will pay you whatever is left when I return. So the innkeeper knows that the Samaritan brought him, and the Samaritan will return. Now, again, we don't know who this man is, but if he does recover, he has no memory of what happened with the Samaritan. But it's entirely possible that the members of his family might think that the Samaritan did it. And so the Samaritan's putting himself at risk by, imagine him carrying, this Jewish man into a place and they see this Samaritan, they would think that maybe he was involved in some way. So he puts himself at risk, and he knows and identifies himself and says that he is going to come back and care for him. So we do have, of course, this moral of the story, which is a pretty simple moral of the story. And that is that the Samaritan is the one that was acting in compassion and was neighbor to the person who was left for dead on the side of the road. And you'll notice when the Jew who asked the question, so now he has to admit that it was the Samaritan who was the neighbor, and then he has to imitate the Samaritan. This would have been very difficult for a Jewish person as well as a scholar of the law to hear. Yet this is what Jesus does. Notice in his response when Jesus says, who of the three was the one who was neighbor to the man? And he doesn't say the Samaritan. He says, the one who acted with mercy. It's kind of a way of kind of getting around having to admit that the Samaritan actually was the one who's the hero in the story. Now, the moral of the story is easy enough, but I was also thinking about the same young man I was talking about, Andy. So when it came time to get him a gift for his confirmation, since he mentioned that he liked the Good Samaritan, there was a Van Gogh painting of the Good Samaritan. So I thought it'd be a good idea to get one of those and frame it for him and to give it to him for his confirmation. But what was interesting about it is there were various colors with the Van Gogh painting, and depending on what frame you put on it, that it would highlight a different part of the image. I said, oh, check this out. You put a red one on, you'd see the hat. And you put a yellow one on, you'd see the field. Anyway, it highlighted different aspects of the picture. So I thought that was a great reflection as well, is how those different characters also reflect different aspects of the story and have something to tell us. For example, sometimes we're the victim. Sometimes we're the one left on the side of the road. We don't really care if it's a family member who helps us. Anyone can help us, and we'd appreciate it. And sometimes it's good for us to at least admit that we're not self-sustaining, that there are times in our lives where we need the help of strangers, and the strangers that have helped us in the past. Sometimes there's no way for us to even thank them or reward them. Yet these are very valuable moments in our lives, and we can thank God for those good Samaritans that we've experienced when we were left on the side of the road, metaphorically or really. And there are also times in our lives where we're like the priest and the Levite. We see something that needs to be done, but for whatever reason, maybe we're fearful. Well, I don't know this person. What's he going to do? And maybe it's because we figure it's not my problem. Well, I don't have to do anything. Let someone else do it. I'll just pull my phone out and maybe film it. That's the thing you ever notice how many times people just film things like that somehow helps? But still, sometimes we're like that. We don't take the opportunity when it's presented in front of us to do something charitable because we might excuse ourselves from having to do it for whatever reason. We think that, well, he's not my family. He's not, not my responsibility. And so anyway, we excuse ourselves from that for whatever reason. And sometimes we have to be challenged at that. Sometimes we're as a Samaritan. I don't know how many times that you all have decided, for whatever reason, that you did act to someone who was in need, who couldn't reward you, couldn't thank you, and probably you would never see again. But those are very important times in your lives as well. So it's interesting. You probably don't remember too many times that you just walked by and didn't do something that you should have. But you probably remember with a grateful heart the people who treated you like neighbor. And you probably also had a powerful experience when you decided to treat someone else as neighbor. So the moral of the story is pretty simple. All children of God are our neighbors. And so we can learn something from this great example of the Good Samaritan. And as Jesus said, just go and do likewise. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. May God bless you and be with you as you live out your faith and serve the Lord this week.